Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa was born in 1836 to a devout family in rural Bengal. As a young man, Ramakrishna was interested in pursuing God consciousness above all other studies. He joined his elder brother, who was then head priest at Dakshineswar Kali Temple, a holy site that is still active today. When his brother passed away, Ramakrishna was appointed as the temple's priest. Continuing his own spiritual practice, he studied with some of the accomplished practitioners who visited the temple. When he met with Totapuri Maharaj, a Naga monk of the Dasnami order of Adi Shankara, Sri Ramakrishna experienced a complete awakening of God consciousness. As he became more well-known, people of all social backgrounds visited Sri Ramakrishna at the Dakshineswar temple. In his teachings, Sri Ramakrishna emphasized the unity of all religions in leading to the ultimate goal of knowing God. Many of his lectures were recorded and later published as a book by one of his prominent disciples, Mahendranath Gupta. This 5-volume Bengali classic was translated into English as the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Its pages are filled with spiritual wisdom that is imparted in parables, clear explanations, and caring dialogues with disciples. We now present to you an excerpt from Chapter 3, Visit to Vidyasagar. The world of duality and transcendental nature of Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna's conversation now turned to the knowledge of Brahman. Master, Brahman is beyond Vyeda and Avyeda, knowledge and ignorance. It is beyond Maya, the illusion of duality. The world consists of the illusory duality of knowledge and ignorance. It contains knowledge and devotion, and also attachment to woman and gold, righteousness and unrighteousness, good and evil. But Brahman is unattached to these. Good and evil apply to the jiva, the individual soul, as do righteousness and unrighteousness. But Brahman is not at all affected by them. One man may read the Bhagavad-gita by the light of a lamp, and another may commit a forgery by that very light, but the lamp is unaffected. The sun sheds its light on the wicked as well as on the virtuous. You may ask, how, then, can one explain misery and sin and unhappiness? The answer is that these apply only to the jiva, the individual soul. Brahman is unaffected by them. There is poison in a snake, but though others may die if bitten by it, the snake itself is not affected by the poison. Brahman cannot be expressed in words. What Brahman is cannot be described. All things in the world, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Tantras, the 6 systems of philosophy, have been defiled, like food that has been touched by the tongue. For they have been read or uttered by the tongue. Only one thing has not been defiled in this way, and that is Brahman. No one has ever been able to say what Brahman is. Master, a man had 2 sons. The father sent them to a preceptor to learn the knowledge of Brahman. After a few years, they returned from their preceptor's house and bowed low before their father. Wanting to measure the depth of their knowledge of Brahman, he first questioned the older of the 2 boys. My child, he said, you have studied all the scriptures. Now tell me, what is the nature of Brahman? The boy began to explain Brahman by reciting various texts from the Vedas. The father did not say anything. Then he asked the younger son the same question. But the boy remained silent and stood with eyes cast down. No word escaped his lips. The father was pleased and said to him, My child, you have understood a little of Brahman. What it is cannot be expressed in words. Parable of the Ant and the Sugar Hill. Men often think they have understood Brahman fully. Once an ant went to a hill of sugar. One grain filled its stomach. Taking another grain in its mouth, it started homeward. On its way, it thought, "Next time I shall carry home the whole hill." That is the way shallow minds think. They don't know that Brahman is beyond one's words and thought. However great a man may be, how much can he know of Brahman? Sukadeva, Rishi, and sages like him may have been big ants, but even they could carry at the utmost 8 or 10 grains of sugar. As for what has been said in the Vedas and the Puranas, do you know what it is like? Suppose a man has seen the ocean, and somebody asks him, "Well, what is the ocean like?" The first man opens his mouth as wide as he can and says, "What a sight! What tremendous waves and sounds!" The description of Brahman in the sacred books is like that. It is said in the Vedas that Brahman is of the nature of bliss. It is Satchidananda, truth, consciousness, bliss. Sukha, Rishi, and other sages stood on the shore of this ocean of Brahman and saw and touched the water. According to one school of thought, they never plunged into it. Those who do cannot come back to the world again. Parable of the Salt Doll. In Samadhi, one attains the knowledge of Brahman. One realizes Brahman. In that state, reasoning stops altogether, and man becomes mute. He has no power to describe the nature of Brahman. Once a salt doll went to measure the depth of the ocean. It wanted to tell others how deep the water was, but this it could never do, for no sooner did it get into the water than it melted. Now who was there to report the ocean's depth? A devotee. Suppose a man has obtained the knowledge of Brahman in Samadhi. Doesn't he speak anymore? Master. Sankaracharya, heads of monasteries in the Advaita traditions, retain the eagle of knowledge in order to teach others. After the vision of Brahman, a man becomes silent. He reasons about it as long as he has not realized it. If you heat vegan butter in a pan on the stove, it makes a sizzling sound as long as the water it contains has not dried up. But when no trace of water is left, the clarified vegan butter makes no sound. If you put an uncooked cake of flour in that vegan butter, it sizzles again. But after the cake is cooked, all sound stops. Just so, a man established in Samadhi comes down to the relative plane of consciousness in order to teach others, and then he talks about God. The bee buzzes as long as it is not sitting on a flower. It becomes silent when it begins to sip the honey, but sometimes, intoxicated with the honey, it buzzes again. An empty pitcher makes a gurgling sound when it is dipped in water. When it fills up, it becomes silent. But if the water is poured from it into another pitcher, then you will hear the sound again. Rishis of ancient India. The rishis of old attained the knowledge of Brahman. One cannot have this so long as there is the slightest trace of worldliness. How hard the rishis labored! Early in the morning, they would go away from the hermitage and would spend the whole day in solitude, meditating on Brahman. At night, they would return to the hermitage and eat a little fruit or roots. They kept their minds aloof from the objects of sight, hearing, touch, and other things of a worldly nature. Only thus did they realize Brahman as their own inner consciousness. But in the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, man, being totally dependent on food for life, cannot altogether shake off the idea that he is the body. In this state of mind, it is not proper for him to say, "I am he." When a man does all sorts of worldly things, he should not say, I am Brahman. Those who cannot give up attachment to worldly things, and who find no means to shake off the feeling of I, should rather cherish the idea, I am God's servant. I am his devotee. One can also realize God by following the path of devotion.
Vegan, they call you a bodhisattva or a saint?
Compassionate viewers, we appreciate your company on today's Words of Wisdom.